Israel seeks to evacuate Palestinians jammed into a southern Gaza city ahead of an expected invasion. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Friday said he has ordered the military to prepare a plan to evacuate civilians from Rafah ahead of an expected Israeli invasion of the densely populated southern Gaza city. The announcement came after heavy international criticism, including from the US, of Israeli intentions to move ground forces into the city that borders Egypt. Rafah had a pre-war population of roughly 280,000, and according to the United Nations is now home to some 1.4 million additional people living with relatives in shelters or in sprawling tent camps after fleeing fighting elsewhere in Gaza. Israel says that Rafah is the last remaining Hamas stronghold in Gaza after more than 4 months of war. It is impossible to achieve the goal of the war of eliminating Hamas by leaving 4 Hamas battalions in Rafah, Netanyahu's office said. It said he had ordered the military and security officials to come up with a combined plan that includes both a mass evacuation of civilians and the destruction of Hamas's forces in the town. Israel declared war after several thousand Hamas militants burst across the border into southern Israel on October 7, killing 1,200 people and taking 250 others hostage. An Israeli air and ground offensive has killed roughly 28,000 Palestinians, most of them women and minors, according to local health officials. Roughly 80% of Gaza's 2.3 million people have been displaced, and the territory has plunged into a humanitarian crisis with shortages of food and medical services. Netanyahu has largely rebuffed international criticism of the civilian death toll, saying that Hamas is responsible for endangering civilians by operating and hiding in residential areas. But that criticism has grown in recent days as Netanyahu and other leaders vow to move into Rafah. US President Joe Biden said Thursday that Israel's conduct in the war is over the top, the harshest US criticism yet of its close ally. The State Department said an invasion of Rafah in the current circumstances would be a disaster. It remains unclear where civilians can go. The Israeli offensive has caused widespread destruction, especially in northern Gaza, and hundreds of thousands of people do not have homes to return to. In addition, Egypt has warned that any movement of Palestinians across the border into Egypt would threaten the 4-decade-old peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. The border crossing between Gaza and Egypt, which is mostly closed, serves as the main entry point for humanitarian aid. Israel already has begun to strike Rafah from the air. Airstrikes overnight and into Friday hit 2 residential buildings in Rafah, while 2 other sites were bombed in central Gaza, including one that damaged a kindergarten-turned-shelter for displaced Palestinians. 22 people were killed, according to AP journalists who saw the bodies arriving at hospitals. Comments from top US officials about Rafah have signaled growing friction with Netanyahu after a visit to the region by US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Blinken, who has been working with Egypt and Qatar on trying to mediate a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, left the region Thursday without an agreement. Netanyahu appeared to snub Blinken, saying he will settle for nothing short of total victory. The Israeli leader has said the war seeks to destroy Hamas's military and governing capabilities and return all hostages home. John Kirby, the White House's national security spokesman, said an Israel ground offensive in Rafah is not something we would support. Aid agency officials have also sounded warnings over the prospect of a Rafah offensive. With the war now in its 5th month, Israeli ground forces are still focusing on the city of Khan Yunis, just north of Rafah, but Netanyahu has repeatedly said Rafah will be next, creating panic among hundreds of thousands of displaced people. Shortly after midnight Friday, a residential building was struck near Rafah's Kuwaiti hospital, killing 5 people from the Al-Sayed family, including 3 children and a woman. A second Rafah strike killed 3 more people. Another overnight strike in the central town of Deir al-Balah claimed 9 lives. Also in central Gaza, a strike hit near a kindergarten-turned-shelter, damaging the building. It killed 5 and wounded several more people.